Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Ridge Talk here in the South Ridge studio today. You got me, of course, Pastor Justin. We got Pastor Daniel, Pastor Sean. And it's been a while since we've been able to all meet together here and film an episode of Ridge Talk. We've had a lot of traveling and other kind of things going on. But for those of you who have not subscribed to the podcast, you can feel free to click the link there at the bottom of the screen. Subscribe every time a new episode drops, then you'll get a notification to let you know that it's out. So a couple weeks ago, Pastor Daniel taught on Psalm 31, and my understanding is you wanted just to follow up on that a little bit this week.
Yeah, well, actually, first of all, not even that long before that, I guess it was the week before that, I did the message on following Jesus into forgiveness and had so many people say, I have a question about this one part, and it was the same part for every single person, and to the point where they were like, could you do a Ridge Talk on this? And you guys were out, so I did the pour over thing, which is always so awkward, but I'm making coffee on screen and answering questions. And I had a couple of people even say, hey, they emailed me about it, and then they were like, oh, wait, never mind. I just saw the Ridge Talk. I'm good. And I'm like, great. So, hey, keep asking questions. And apparently this format works in those scenarios. Cool. So I thought that was good.
And there are great books out there on the topic of forgiveness.
That's right.
Like Lisa TerKeurst's Forgiving What You Can't Forget. Tim Keller has a book called Forgive. Why Should I and How Can I, or something like that. There's just some great resources out there that just really unpack what the scriptures teach on the topic of forgiveness.
Yeah, I think that's really healthy. You mentioned Psalm 31. So in my Psalm 31 message, which already felt long, even to me giving it, I know everyone thinks it's long when I'm talking, but even as I'm giving it, I'm thinking this is probably too long. So I intentionally withheld some stuff that I wanted to talk about, and I mentioned it on that Sunday. Essentially what I went through, going through Psalm 31, I identified, hey, this is just a real psalm that identifies real hardships that we experience in life. And I know that we do, that we all experience real hardships. But it also gives us real reasons to rejoice because of who God is, his character, and how he is toward us. And I spent quite a bit of time talking about what that means, what it means for us to rejoice because of who God is and how he is toward us. And then I gave a couple of maybe 3 worshipful responses to God and his work toward us. And so, but the section that I said I have more to say on this was, one of those responses was, Psalm 31 reveals multiple times God is a faithful God. And in verse 23, near the end, it's giving us kind of 3 things to think about how to respond to him worshipfully. So there in verse 23 and also in verse 14, we get this idea of, we respond to the faithfulness of God by putting our faith in him, that we put our trust and our hope in him and his character and how he is toward us. But there was a lot more to unpack. I didn't get to unpack there because really I think Psalm 31 gives 2 responses, 2 ways that we can respond to God. One is through idolatry. Verse 6, David says, I hate all of those who follow after vain idols and worship vain idols. But it's just an interesting thing to bring idolatry into the context of everything he's saying in Psalm 31. But I think he's giving us a glimpse into one way that we could respond to God, that we could see who he is, or hear about who he is and how he is toward us. And instead we reject that and we turn to vain idols, that we, in the midst of the real hardships that we face. David mentioned a lot of hardships that he had faced. In fact, there was 2 sections where he talked about the hardships he had faced. And I think that it's a very common response for fallen human beings to turn to vain idols instead of turning to God when it comes to trying to navigate their hardships. And so we turn to all sorts of things. We turn, you guys, we've probably listed those things before, but we turn to money for security. We turn to relationships with other people, thinking that'll satisfy our greatest need. We turn to addictive things, doom scrolling or drugs or alcohol, whatever the thing might be that we think is going to release us from the anxiety and the tension of our hardships. And they don't do that. They don't satisfy. So there's idolatry on the one hand. That's one response to God. The other response is to, and I use the word faith, but there's a word picture in Psalm 31 that I didn't even get to talk about then, but we're talking about it now, is that placing your faith in God means placing your life, your soul, every part of you into his hands. So at least 2 times it's explicit, but really there's even more mentions of kind of God gathering together in his hands his people. And so verse 5 is kind of the one that's really famous. It's the one that Jesus quoted on the cross. Into your hand I commit my spirit. Again in verse 15, right after that statement in verse 14 about placing your trust in the Lord, verse 15, it's a beautiful statement. He says, my times are in your hand. Literally all of my life, every experience I have, the good times, the bad times, the sorrowful times, the anxiety-ridden times, the sinful times, the rejoicing times, all of my times are in your hand. And I think that's just a beautiful word picture for us about what it means to really trust in God, to really place our faith in him, to acknowledge that our life is not under our own control. It's not in our own hands, but everything, our spirit, our lives, every part of us, our times are in his hand. And so anyways, that was kind of the recap. That's the section it was so meaningful. And as I've kind of been processing that over the last week and a half or so, I think it's only become more important to think in that way. Hours after delivering the Psalm 31 message, our area was hit by what they're calling a unicorn storm that just flooded, devastated homes and families in our community. Lots and lots of people were experiencing hardships like what David was experiencing there. And even then on a national scale right now, we're all seeing the news and the things that are going on in the Middle East. Now, the United States entering into some of that tension with Iran. I think it's really easy for us to look at trials and hardships and become anxiety ridden and worried about the future. And I think the ability for us to step back and say, but we're going to commit our souls into the hands of God. Our times are in his hand, and that includes summer 2025. Our times are in God's hand. And anyways, as many times as I think we can point people to faith in God and who he is, his character, but also how he is toward his people, I just think that's a really important thing for us to do.
Yeah, I think one of the other idols we can turn to is also news. Sure. We can turn to news networks that just reinforce our own ideology, but it's still communicating a message that is entrenched in fear.
That's right.
Of something. And when we take that in throughout the day more than we take in just resting in the love of God, then we're going to be afraid.
Do you think that's a control thing? That people think as long as I'm glued to the news, I know what's going on and therefore I have some feeling or sense of control in what's happening? Why do you think? I agree that it can be an idol. I'm just interested in unpacking that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that I've given it enough thought to philosophize on that too much.
Yeah, I think it probably is one of the most tangible things in any given moment that you can do is to at least feel like you're aware.
Yeah.
Like none of us like to be caught off guard, perhaps. So like being aware and trying to think through all of the things that are at play to try and be prepared for what might be coming next. Mm-hmm. Those types of things, which are all great impulses. And I don't think that surrendering your life into the hands of God isn't like just a passive, like, okay, now I'm not going to think about anything,
no,
be prepared for anything or whatever. So it's also not saying that. It's not meant to be like a trite, hey, don't worry at all or don't be aware, but it is, it's like what comes first? Are you going to watch the news, look at what's happening in the world, and do that already having intentionally said, God, I'm going to trust you with all of this. And then that sort of like is something that you're bringing before the Lord to say, okay, this is happening, whether it's my home just got flooded or whether it's there are things happening in the world that might have some effect on me or on others, would that be something that you would bring back to God, or are you going to let that consume and blot out like that statement of trust that you might have said before all of that?
That's right. I think James, faith that does not result in action is not real faith. Any faith that says, oh, never mind, I'm not going to worry about this water that's in my basement. God's got this. Like, okay, but you still got to get it out of there, right?
Yeah.
And if we as a church had said, God will help the people who got flooded, we're not going to do anything. Well, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Our faith does produce action. Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. So it's not that shouldn't be a trite thing, but I do think I do think it is important for us to understand how little really is in our control, and to entrust God with all these things. That doesn't negate the action that we take, but I think it's important for us to see that we need to turn it over and acknowledge that God's got this.
Yeah, I don't know if we're getting off topic from everything you wanted to get into or not. I've been putting together just an 8-week life group for us for this fall, an intro to the Bible kind of thing, but trying to make sure that it includes just some discipleship principles of being with Jesus and the holistic meaning that unfolds throughout the scriptures as you read through it. But one of the things that came up through my reading and study, especially with Moses and Moses leading the people of Israel out of Egypt, it's really emphasized that God wasn't trying to get his people out of Egypt. He was trying to get Egypt out of his people. All the cultural ideologies and things and the worship of so many other gods that was common in Egypt at that time, God's like, no, we're not going to go into the land of milk and honey for 40 years. We're going to stay out here in the desert and completely get you away from that so that you're ready to go into this new land. And the people of God got to that point of, I trust you, I trust you, I trust you. Just you. And if you look at some coins and iconography and other artwork that the people of Israel created hundreds of years later, like during King Hezekiah, they still had Egyptian symbols and markings on them. And it's like they still didn't really get all of Egypt out of their system. They were still looking to certain icons and other things outside of God himself. And I think that, just in our culture, we have to be aware of that our culture is constantly trying to pull us in directions away from trust in God. Can we watch the news to be aware of what's happening? Yes. Ought we? Probably so. But where is that line, and how often do we cross that line of getting into fear or something else that really draws us away from God? As the scriptures say, there's no fear in love. Let's draw closer to God and his love. So.
Yeah, and I think it's like, what's the intention? Am I looking at being aware of things around me so that I can respond in the way that I feel God is asking me to respond or enter into this situation? Or am I just going into it and now I'm going to let it steer how I live my life? I think those are very different postures. If it's, how am I aware of what's happening in the world so that I can bring some sort of redemptive presence to these situations? That's the right posture.
Yeah.
If you're not going into that, it's all the more easy to get completely consumed and let those circumstances start steering you. And then you've forgotten, I'm like, my presence in this situation is actually supposed to be bringing God's redemption through the work of his Spirit in me in these circumstances, rather than letting these circumstances kind of dictate how I'm responding, or just maybe even being completely swallowed up by the anxiety and fear that they create.
That might have taken a little bit of a rabbit hole from what you initially intended, but David talking about idols and us just getting into what are some idols that are common today probably took us there.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think it's healthy for us to be aware of the idols that we. John Calvin said that the human heart is a factory of idols, that we're just continually churning them out. And I think he's right about that. I think left to our own devices, when we take our eyes off God, we look to a million other things to satisfy what only God can satisfy. And so, I think that's really helpful to be aware of the idolatry that is in our hearts and that surrounds us in our culture. But then ultimately, I think still pointing back to our times are in God's hand. I think it's a great encouragement and a truth that we need to cling to today. So
it's good. Anything else you wanted to share?
I wanted to make sure I got that out there.
Yeah, no, that's good. Do we have any events or anything coming up at Southridge that we probably want to just tell people about?
Coming up early in the fall, we have our 20th anniversary party that's going to happen Sunday, September 7th. It's a big party we're throwing here at the church, celebrating 20 years of life and ministry as a church. And it's the day before my birthday, so I'm just going to pretend it's all for me, right? No, I'm not going to do that. But we're really, really excited. We've got a lot of events already things for the event already planned, including we've booked the food, and I'm very excited about the food. And so
I like food.
Yeah, and I think everybody who shows up is going to enjoy it too. So that's one thing on the horizon.
Okay, I just had a quick meeting earlier this morning for the Union Mission Run for Recovery race that's coming up, and a lot of people listening to this might be, I don't run. But we've been ministry partners with the Union Mission for a long time now, and it's not just a 5K run; it's also a 2K walk. And a 2K walk is 1.2 miles. It's really not that far. So we'll have more information coming out in the weeks ahead during our services for that. But if you anybody who is interested went to runforrecovery.run, they could register there. And I learned this morning too that anybody who signs up under Team Southridge Church gets a $5 discount in their registration. So there's that.
There you go.
Yeah. So, anything else you want to share, Sean? Anything else you have coming up on the horizon?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. You going to be there for the Run for Recovery?
I choose not to run.
Great. You can walk. All right. So that's all we have here this morning or this week, I think. Again, feel free to like this episode and click the link there below to subscribe. And we'll see you all back here again next time.